5 minutes past 3. Well, my next guest I have been reading up about and very excited to welcome into the studio. Media icon, magazine darling, Ita-Buttrose. Welcome to the studio, Ita.
Thank you.
Last time we met was a few years ago and I was pregnant with my first child and you were interviewing me in the Hyatt.
I was for SA Live.
That's right.
That's right.
And I was very daunted at the time to be in a room with you and some other media types because you're an icon. We feel as though we know you, and yet there is so much left to know. And you are here to promote your self-titled autobiography, Ita-Buttrose, A Passionate Life, that I read from cover to cover when it first came out a few years ago. But there's still so much that you felt that you wanted to add.
Well, I think the last version was about 13 years ago.
Right.
And last year, after Paper Giants and then the Australian Story and covering the royal wedding of William and Kate, I got a call from Penguin, my publisher, to say, come in for a cup of tea. And they said, we think it's time you did another version of your autobiography. And I said, oh, righto. So that's how it came about. So I really thought it wouldn't be too hard a thing to do, but in fact it was harder than I anticipated, because when I started to read through it again, I thought, I've something else has happened. I'm not interested in that anymore. We've moved along from that situation. There are other things that have captured my attention. So there was a lot of rewriting that went on. Certainly the back half of the book. I mean, the front half, I've sort of brought it up to date where it was necessary, but the back half I more or less rewrote. And so it took me a little longer than I anticipated, but it wasn't a hardship, because it is quite cathartic to look back over your life and think about some of the things you've done and, the things that interest you and people you've met and experiences you've enjoyed.
Now, you started as a 15-year-old copy kid on the Weekly. You ended up, of course, editing it and then appearing on its front cover some 50 years later. What has that journey been like for you? And did you ever envisage that you would end up where you are today?
No, I didn't envisage where I am today at all. And it's been the most wonderful journey you could ever possibly imagine. And when I decided all those years ago, when I was 11, that I wanted to be a journalist, I know it was the right decision, and I've never regretted it for a minute. It's opened so many doors for me, and it's a wonderful profession as far as I'm concerned, and I love it, and I've always loved it, and I'm still enjoying my career.
Let's talk about working for Kerry Packer and the birth of Cleo, as we've seen in Paper Giants, and Asher Keddy's portrayal of you in that. And I take you to that one scene where you were trying to hide, and you write this in your book, A Passionate Life, where you were trying to hide your pregnancy with your second child, Ben, and fearful, I believe, of telling Kerry Packer that you were pregnant. Can you talk us through that moment?
Not fearful so much as perhaps a tad nervous, because because it was in the lead up to the launch of Cleo. But my husband and I, we really did want another baby, and it had been 4.5 years since we'd had our daughter Katie, and we were trying to have a baby. That was as simple as that. And wouldn't you know it? Wouldn't you know it? I got pregnant after all those years of trying and not being successful. I got pregnant in the launch leading up to Cleo. So when I couldn't sort of do my jackets up any longer, and I knew the time had come, I sort of nervously went to tell Mr. Kerry that I was pregnant, and he took it really well. He was very nice to me, I must say, and he said, "That's lovely. The old man will be pleased." Because Sir Frank actually thought it was very important for women to have babies, and very early on, it did look as though that my chances of conceiving didn't look too good, and he sent me off to a gynecologist and paid for the examination.
So Frank did?
Yes, because he knew how important it was for women to have babies. So, I mean, that's the side of Sir Frank you wouldn't even know, would you?
No.
So I went off and I was duly examined, and I was told I was subfertile. And I left there and went to one of my friend's places crying, saying, maybe I'm not going to be a mother. Anyway, as it turned out, I proved the doctors wrong. I do like doing that. And of course, I eventually had 2 children. But so he said, the old man will be pleased. And that was the reason why I said the old man will be pleased. And then it wasn't quite accurate the way they showed it in the Paper Giants. What really happened was he then, at some point after I told him, he told his old man, he went down to J. Walter Thompson, our advertising agency, which was about 2 blocks, so by foot, 2 blocks from where we were, where Consolidated Press is. And he went ballistic down there about blankety blank women, who go and have baby, blah, 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 blah. And I only heard about this much later when one of the guys at J. Walter Thompson's told me that Kerry had been down there venting his spleen. But, you've got to realise that in the early 70s, it wasn't all that long since the rule had changed of the public service that a woman, when she got married, had to leave the public service. I mean, you didn't even get pregnant. You had to leave when you got married. And women, when they got pregnant, even in private enterprise, everyone thought we'd just go home. Pregnancy was almost seen like some kind of illness. And I never contemplated not continuing on with my work when I was pregnant because my mother, you see, you don't know where you're going to have these examples from. My mother was a working mother, and I'm one of 4, and my third brother is 10 years younger than I am. So I can remember when my mother was pregnant with my brother, and my mother was working, and she worked through her pregnancy. So it never occurred to me that I wouldn't work through my pregnancy, and I think I was a role model in that I showed the packer company and the men in the corporate in the structure, and also other men, because business was controlled by men, that when a woman is pregnant, it doesn't mean she's ill. She's perfectly capable of working. She still thinks. You've got to be unlucky to have a pregnancy that puts you to bed, as some women experience, but most of us get through it pretty well. And I think in that regard, I was a role model. And because at one of our subsidiary companies, a girl called Maria Quinn, she said to me, she said, "Oh, thank God you kept working, because if they were going to fire me," KG Murray is another one it was a publishing company that we owned. They said they were going to fire me, and I said, "Ida's still working," and so they said, "Oh, okay," and so Maria kept her job. Yeah.
Goodness me. Now, you talk about Paper Giants, starring Asha Keddy, who we know as Nina in Channel 10's Offspring. Now, that did amazing figures for the ABC. 1.21 million viewers, part 2, 1.34 million. What was it like watching you portrayed on screen?
Well, I was overseas going off to London to cover the royal wedding at that point when that came on, but I had seen it beforehand. And I tell you, it's very, very unusual watching somebody being you. I mean, and when I went on the set to watch Asha playing me, again, I was struck by it. But I do think she did a great job, and she certainly studied me very closely. Had a lot of my mannerisms and my expressions, the way I use my hands when I speak. It was very interesting, but I think in retrospect, all of us who worked on Cleo in those early days, we were really thrilled to see our work recognised this way. It was a great thrill for all of us.
You had dinners, did you, leading up to it for her to... Yes.
With Asha, yeah, we had a couple of dinners, and we had a couple of production meetings, and, she would ask me questions. And in one scene, I remember, in the Paper Giants, I slipped when I was pregnant. And I did. That's true. I did slip. Not quite as ungainly a manner as Asha showed on the screen, but I did slip on the polished floor. And I got up. Everybody rushed out to see if I was all right. And I went inside of my office, and I sort of sat there trying to get my composure back because I got a fright. I mean, I frightened myself. And in the original script, they had me putting my head down on the desk and crying like a maniac. And I said to Asha, "I would never have done that." I said, "What if someone came in?" She said, I know you wouldn't." And she said, "I'm not going to play it like that either.
I'll change it."
Yeah. So she said, "What did you do?" And I said, I sort of went, like a little leap in my breath, just the shock of it. And she said, "Right." So we're actually on the same wavelength, and I thought, I think I'm in good hands with Asha.
And I did ask her on the program a couple of weeks ago, was she daunted by playing the prospect of playing you? Because I would imagine it would be easier to play someone who wasn't still living, because you wouldn't have to brace yourselves for their judgment. She said, "I wouldn't say I was daunted. I rose to the challenge," I think were her words.
Well, I think she did.
My guest today in the studio is Ita-Buttrose, who has written her self-titled autobiography, Ita-Buttrose, A Passionate Life. We'll take a short break, and I want to ask Ita when we come back, what was it like to work for Kerry Packer and Rupert Murdoch, and who is harder to work for? I'm lucky enough to be joined in the studio today by media icon Ita-Buttrose. Her book, her self-titled autobiography, Ita-Buttrose, A Passionate Life. It is a wonderful read, a very telling read. Now, Ita, who's harder to work for, Kerry Packer or Rupert Murdoch?
Well, each in their own way, come with challenges. But look, the Packer Company was a wonderful company to work for as a woman. And women always got great opportunities there. And that's because Kerry told me once he'd grown up seeing women run the Women's Weekly. And it never occurred to him that women weren't talented and capable. And so there were always opportunities for women. And I think Sir Frank felt the same way. And the Packer Company also had a very robust sense of humour. And it was a really great place to work, I must say. And as a boss, Kerry allowed his executives to make decisions. So there were 5 key executives that reported to him that were responsible for different divisions of his empire, and I was one of them. And he trusted all of us to make the right decisions. And if we ever needed to ask his advice or, run something by him, if we were going to spend an enormous amount of money on something or other, of course you would go and just chat it over with him. But he allowed us to operate freely and unencumbered. He was a really good boss, a very good administrator. Rupert, of course, Adelaide boy. He's done remarkably well. And he wasn't in Australia a great deal. By the time I went to News Limited, he was expanding his empire around the world. And so I would sometimes go to New York. I would have to go to New York, It wasn't a hardship. I was quite liked going to New York to see Rupert. And, he'd be running through the papers over there with me, looking at things that he wanted done or, just making observations. Once I went to London to see him and we went to Wimbledon together. He took me to Wimbledon along with some of his other staff who were running some of his London newspapers for him. And that was great because I'd never been to Wimbledon before, and it is the full bit, the champagne and the strawberries and the marquees. Oh my God, it was just too much. It was wonderful. I always felt he wasn't quite as comfortable in the company of women as the Packers were. But then if you look at the two cultures of the company, they're very different. There was one company where women were always encouraged and were given top jobs. News Limited was still, I reckon, a macho company, and they'd never had women in the high, in the upper echelon of decision making there. They'd never had a woman boss before. So I was the first, to come along to edit newspapers. I was the first woman actually to ever edit a major metropolitan newspaper in Australia. So
that, of course, was the Sydney Daily Telegraph and Sunday Telegraph.
So I was a very unknown to the staff who at that point felt that editing newspapers was a man's job. So a woman coming along to do this job was viewed with great suspicion.
Now, Ita, the notion of women being able to have it all, I think is a furphy. I think we can perhaps have it all, but just not all at once. And I'm interested to hear your thoughts on the generation of women that I'm in, the 30 to 40-year-old bracket, that have climbed the career ladder. They're financially secure, but they turn around and they find that they've perhaps missed the boat in terms of having children, that they don't have the partner that they'd so longed for, that they've got the career, they've got their finances intact, but no babies.
Well, when you say women can't have it all, or they can have it all, but not all at once, I'm not quite sure what you mean by that. But look, I think women can have it all if they want it. But you've got to plan for it. I mean, you've got to organise your life to sort it out. So you say to yourself, what do I want in my life? I want a career. I want to have a relationship. I want to have a family. So how will I make that happen? So you have to think how you're going to make that happen. And a career is a wonderful thing. There's no doubt about that. But it's not the most important thing in life, I don't think. The most important thing in life are our relationships. It's really our relationships that keep us happy, that make us get up in the morning and put a smile on our face. When our relationships are going well, we feel good. When they're not going well, we feel bad. At the end of the day, when work is really not important to us, when we're older and work is not the most important thing to us, it's going to be relationships that keep us going. Relationships with your family, relationships with your friends. So you have to think about these priorities. And if I was saying, look, I want it all, my all would be a relationship, a family, and a career. But you have to think, how do I put that all together and make it work? This question has come about because of that American woman executive whose name I cannot recollect, who wrote how she was struggling with her job. She was in Washington, 5 days a week, and then her family was in some other part of America, and she was finding it hard to juggle. Well, I don't think having it all means leaving your family behind. That's not having it all. That's
stretching yourself thin, isn't it?
Well, that's making the most terrible sacrifice you'd ever want to make. You're sacrificing your time with your family, and that's important. So maybe it was the wrong career move at that point. Maybe the family should have moved with her. I have no idea, but that was the wrong choice. That was the wrong choice at that point of her life, and that's why it was a struggle. There's no doubt about it. Teenagers, because I think it was because her children were teenagers and one was struggling a bit somewhere, teenagers do need to have their family around them. And even if you're working, you still have to watch the teenager very carefully. I remember when my son was a teenager and I was making breakfast, I'd come home and the kitchen was near the family room, and the phone rang and he took it, and he was clearly uncomfortable on the phone, and I could tell from the tone of his voice. And I stopped what I was doing in the kitchen. I'd come home from work and I said, "Who are you talking to?" And it was some bloke who was trying to get him to go to some nightclub and something to do with drugs, and Ben wasn't even 16, and I just said, "Give me the phone." And I said, my son is 15. If I catch you ring my son one more time, I'll have the cops on you so fast you won't know what hit you. Don't ring my son again. And I hung the phone up. And you do have to be vigilant. You have to be very watchful of your children all the time, but especially when they're teenagers. Because he just didn't know how to handle this situation, and he was so relieved that I took the phone and I dealt with it for him.
And you were his lioness mother.
But my oath.
Yeah.
Don't you touch my boy.
I wouldn't mess with Ita-Buttrose, no way. Now, you write in the book, tough times don't last. I think this was with the demise of the Ita magazine because of the lack of advertising. But you say tough people do. Would you describe yourself as tough?
Yeah, I'm tough. I don't mean I'm mean tough, but I'm tough. I'm resilient. Yes, of course. I don't think you can operate at the levels I've operated without a certain resilience, without a certain toughness. You are required when you're running big business, as I have done, and when you're running small business, as I have done. You are required to make and take tough decisions. And if you can't do this, then you shouldn't be running these. You shouldn't be in these positions.
What do you think about magazines today? The rise of media on the internet, and also we see this week on Friday, Channel 10's The View will finish up. We'll see American content coming in. Sorry, The Circle. The Circle. And you, of course, starred in Beauty and the Beast. Where do you see the media going forward in the next, say, 40 years?
Well, I wish I had a crystal ball and I'd tell you. But I don't think we should be frightened of the opportunities digital publishing is going to offer to us. And I don't think print is going to disappear overnight either. You only have to go to the newsagent to see all the newspapers and the magazines that are there. They're not going to not be here tomorrow morning or in a week's time. They will change. I think some magazines will go and become apps and tablet publishing, and that's how you'll get your magazine. I think some newspapers will still have content, but there'll be more specialised behind-the-scene news that you mightn't be able to get any other place but this particular newspaper. The writers will be stitched up. If you want to read these guys, you're going to have to get this newspaper. I think they might put their magazines, their weekend magazines, they might turn them into apps and people can download them and read them at their leisure. So I think there will be some jockeying around as we find position. But if you look at the positives of digital publishing, it will allow us to do things that we can't do in traditional print. It will allow us to have more interactive presentations, interactive advertisements. We'll be able to, we can do fashion better. We could have the front, the back, the side of the dress, and then we could have a picture of the fashion editor, and you press a button and the fashion editor can talk to you about trends.
Pop up and talk up.
Yeah, so there's all sorts of exciting things that will happen. But it's always been said that radio, television, all the new things that have come along will be a threat to print. And we've all survived. We've jockeyed around, repositioned, trimmed, cut costs here and there. And I think that will still happen. Maybe eventually there will be no such thing as print, I don't know. But, every now and again when I pick up a new magazine that's just fresh off the press.
There's nothing like it, is there?
And I smell the ink in the paper, I think, oh, wow, that is such a good smell.
What do you think about Julia Gillard? Has she been hard done by?
Well, she's certainly governed Australia through a very difficult time. And I think there's no doubt that she is a tough person. I think on a personal basis, she's certainly been subjected to a massive personal criticism, which I think is completely uncalled for. Her hair colour, her fruit bowl, her body shape, the clothes she wears. I mean, it's just, think, come on. Haven't we got over this yet? We've never talked about male prime ministers this way. We don't talk about the suits they wear, the ties they wear, the clothes they wear. I think we did comment on John Howard's eyebrows at one point.
They were quite unruly.
Yes, and he obviously hasn't tidied up. But they're so personal and they're so cruel. And I do think that as women we need to raise our voices and say it's got to stop. The Prime Minister is the Prime Minister, and the fact that she happens to be a woman is neither here nor there. Criticise her policies by all means if you want to, but don't get personal about her appearance. I mean, and they've done it with Gina Rinehart. If I just think about it, on Q&A, Tony Jones allowed Miriam Margolyes and Barry Humphries to talk about Gina Rinehart in a way that I thought was completely uncalled for. And I think Miriam Margolyes actually said she was fat and ugly. Now, that's appalling. That's an appalling thing to say about another human being. We don't need that kind of comment. I mean, how would you want to be treated? I would think, how would you want to be treated if it were you?
Yes, yeah, indeed.
And, this sort of personal comments about women need to stop. And we need to all say, no, I'm as mad as hell and I'm not going to take it anymore.
Ita-Buttrose, one last question on etiquette, because you've penned some tomes on etiquette. Friend of a friend, the male fiancé, broke up with his bride-to-be. Does she give back the ring?
Strictly speaking, it's not unusual for the bride to give back the ring. But I suppose if it's in her possession and she wishes to keep it, there's not much he can do about it. But would she wear it? I mean, if the relationship has ended and the wedding is not going to take place, would she really wear this ring again with the joy that she wore it with when it was first given to her? And whatever the outcome of it, there was a relationship here. There was a point when this couple loved each other. I think I'd try to remember the really good times of the relationship and give the ring back and say thank you. And
what are you doing in the next couple of years? More books in you, Ita-Buttrose?
Well, I did see the publisher just the other day at lunch at a book event I was doing, and I said, I have an idea for another book. She said, I'll take you to lunch. Now, that's even a better sign.
That's better than high tea.
Absolutely. So I do have another idea for a book that I'd like to get cracking on. And I've always wanted to go to Africa and see elephants in the wild. And in January, I'm going to South Africa, to Kruger National Park and Victoria Falls. And I am going to see elephants in the wild. And I am looking forward to it.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for your time this afternoon.
Thank you.
Ita-Buttrose. The autobiography is called Ita-Buttrose, A Passionate Life, in all good bookshops. We'll take you to the 3:30 news and we'll be back in a moment.